A man stole the most famous painting in the world, and nobody noticed for 24 hours. No alarms, no chase, no gun. Just one guy, one coat, and a chest hiding a billion-dollar painting while police walked in and out of his apartment and left empty-handed every single time. This isn't just the story of the Mona Lisa, this is history's most embarrassing security failure. And it's only the beginning. What is up, friends? Welcome back to SavantPOV, where we cover the most insane, unbelievable, and true stories from around the world. Stories that will keep you up at night. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because after today's video, you're going to want to stick around. Now let's get into it. The craziest heist that actually worked. The Mona Lisa mystery. In October of 2025, only 5 months ago from the date of recording this video, the famous French museum, the Louvre, was robbed for over 88 million in jewelry. The entire heist only took 8 minutes. And out of those 8 minutes, thieves only spent 4 within the museum itself. This heist took place in daylight hours, and almost immediately after it happened, it made national headlines. And I'm assuming that most of you remember hearing about it, at least in some capacity. As of right now, charges have been filed against 5 suspects in relation to that robbery. However, the whereabouts of those missing jewels are still unknown to this very day. And while that heist is recent and noteworthy, it's actually not the heist I'm going to be discussing. Because, believe it or not, it's not the most expensive or most significant robbery that's taken place at the Louvre. And in my opinion, the most expensive and significant heist that took place at the Louvre actually dates all the way back to 1911, when the Louvre experienced its first documented heist, which resulted in the Mona Lisa being stolen for years. Let me paint a picture for you. No pun intended. Vincenzo Peruggia was born on October 8, 1881 in Italy. He spent his childhood and young adult life living in a small village on the border of Italy and Switzerland. But due to a lack of local career opportunities, Vincenzo decided to move to Paris, and quickly he was able to secure work. Vincenzo picked up a job at the Louvre, possibly one of the most iconic landmarks in all of Paris, if not all of France. And while his job was modest and simple, he was still able to play a significant role in the institution. Vincenzo's job primarily consisted of cleaning and framing paintings, as well as constructing strong cases for some of the more expensive artwork. One notable piece being the Mona Lisa. Vincenzo unfortunately didn't hold this job for long, and from 1908 to 1911, he ended up working different odd jobs around Paris. That was until the summer of 1911, when he decided to do the job of a lifetime. Fed up with doing random construction jobs around Paris, Vincenzo wanted to make a big sum of money, and he also wanted to do something patriotic for his country. And he decided the best way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone was by using his expertise to steal the Mona Lisa and then bring it back to Italy, where he could sell it and return it to its rightful country of origin. But we'll get to that. On August 20th, 1911, Vincenzo entered the Louvre only minutes before it closed. He was dressed in what was known as a traditional smock, and it was essentially a white lab coat that Louvre employees would wear. Vincenzo knew this from working there previously and was able to get almost an exact replica, something that would come in handy later on. Since he entered the Louvre so late, he knew he only had minutes to try to find the perfect hiding spot before he would be asked to leave. And once again, because of his experience working there, he was able to quickly find a closet and set up camp for the night. The following morning, at 7 a.m., August the 21st, Vincenzo awoke from his likely uncomfortable storage closet slumber and began to execute on his plan. Immediately after exiting the closet, he was met with nobody. And that's because this Monday, like every Monday during the summer at the time, the Louvre was closed, which meant that security and foot traffic were at an all-time low. By 7:15 a.m., Vincenzo had made his way to the Salon Carré, the room where the Mona Lisa and other notorious paintings were held. That's right. Believe it or not, there was a time when the Mona Lisa did not have its own special room. Regardless, due to his experience working with these exact paintings, Vincenzo was able to quickly and expertly remove the Mona Lisa off the wall and bring it to a secluded staircase where he could remove it from its frame. The very frame he was very likely involved in the construction of, explaining why he was able to so quickly and expertly once again remove the painting from the frame. So far, every aspect of his plan had gone off without a hitch. He covered the painting with his white smock and tucked them both under his arm as if it was a free newspaper. And to Vincenzo, this plan almost seemed too easy. That was until he tried to leave the Louvre. As he tried to use the exit in the stairway, he was met with one major problem: a locked door. Vincenzo had no keys to the Louvre, and because he stayed overnight, and this was the day the Louvre was closed, there was likely only locked doors surrounding the entire premises, meaning he was potentially locked in there until the following day. However, almost instantly after all hope had seemed lost, Vincenzo was met with his saving grace. A plumber making his way down the staircase just so happened to notice Vincenzo looking perplexed at the locked back door. And this plumber, wanting to be polite and assuming this employee was simply struggling with the door, offered to unlock the door for him and allow him to go about his day. A gesture that Vincenzo accepted gratefully. After being let out of the Louvre with the Mona Lisa hidden under his arm only minutes after emerging from the storage closet, Vincenzo was on his way back to his apartment with one of the most iconic pieces of art ever made. And one of the craziest parts is no one was the wiser for over 24 hours. And that's because the following day, when the Louvre reopened, a photography session was taking place for a majority of the Louvre's art, meaning a lot of art was being taken on and off the wall all day. And for that reason, people simply assumed that the Mona Lisa was being photographed. However, the following day, when the Mona Lisa was the only piece of art to not be returned after being photographed, people started to become concerned, and it quickly became obvious that somebody had stolen the Louvre's girl. Once the museum made the official decision to declare the Mona Lisa stolen, they contacted authorities, and almost instantly detectives were at the scene, and the national border of France started being closely monitored to ensure no trafficking of the painting outside of the country. However, even with that measure being taken, the search for the Mona Lisa quickly became a global pursuit, and the reward for information that would lead to the recovery of the Mona Lisa quickly rose to over 150,000 francs. After the public was informed that the Mona Lisa was stolen and that there was a major cash prize for any information potentially leading to its recovery, the authorities were bombarded with an overwhelming amount of tips, all essentially contradicting each other, leaving almost no recognizable patterns for authorities to work off of. However, that doesn't mean they didn't have any suspects. While the authorities at this point were essentially questioning anybody that had almost any relationship to the Louvre, two notable suspects were Pablo Picasso and Vincenzo himself. Pablo Picasso was a notable suspect simply because he was a known art thief, or at least a purchaser of stolen art. Someone who had stolen statues from the Louvre in the past admitted that they had stolen statues from the Louvre and sold them to Pablo Picasso. And when authorities investigated these claims, they were able to find that, yes, the same statues that this individual had claimed to have stolen and sold were currently in Pablo Picasso's home. And it was for that reason that he was heavily questioned by the police. However, they were not convinced he had any involvement, which led them to question every employee of the Louvre, past and present, which led them to Vincenzo. However, even though he was a suspect, he was not a prime suspect simply because his employment there was brief and not necessarily high level. And each time that the authorities talked to him, he made a convincing case that he had no idea what was going on, and he had no involvement whatsoever. Little did the investigators know that every time they entered Vincenzo's apartment, they were literally within smelling distance of the Mona Lisa. And that's because Vincenzo had hidden the Mona Lisa in the bottom of a chest he kept in his apartment and then covered it with a false floor to make it look like an empty chest. However, that empty chest just so happened to contain a piece of art that is now worth over $1 billion. But we'll get to that. For over 2 years after the heist, Vincenzo lived a normal life, keeping the Mona Lisa just sitting in a trunk in his apartment. However, after these 2 years, he was fed up with having it sitting there doing nothing, and he decided it was time to return the painting to his homeland, a place he believed the painting belonged, and not for no reason either. Leonardo da Vinci did paint the Mona Lisa in Florence, Italy. However, the Mona Lisa wasn't stolen from Italy by Napoleon, as Vincenzo thought. In reality, the Mona Lisa was actually gifted to King Francis I by Leonardo da Vinci when he moved to France 250 years before Napoleon was ever even born. Regardless, Vincenzo wrote an anonymous letter to an art dealer in Florence offering them the real Mona Lisa. And while skeptical, this art dealer invited Vincenzo to meet him in Florence in a hotel. And Vincenzo traveled with his trunk from Paris to Florence, where he met with the dealer in the hotel, showed him the Mona Lisa, and tried to conduct a deal. The art dealer told Vincenzo that his patriotic move was very much so appreciated. And while he wanted to make a deal, he needed to ensure the painting was authentic first. and for that reason, he had to get it examined by his team. Vincenzo accepted these terms and waited in his hotel, only for there to be a knock on the door only an hour later. Although this wasn't a quick approval of authenticity, it was the police who came to arrest Vincenzo. You see, once the art dealer successfully had the Mona Lisa in his possession, he decided to contact authorities, which they were eager to respond, and Vincenzo was promptly arrested. Although, even though the scale of his crime was massive, his punishment was relatively small. He ended up only spending 7 months in prison, and it's reported that he was given a lighter sentence due to his patriotic intentions with the painting. However, in recent times, experts actually question whether or not he was trying to be patriotic or simply using that as an excuse. Because Vincenzo wasn't trying to donate the painting to an Italian museum. He was trying to sell it to an Italian art dealer, meaning he was at least partially motivated by profit as well. Regardless, if you wanted to know what it was like to steal the world's most important and expensive painting, here you go. Although be warned, the Louvre has slightly more security than it did over 100 years ago. And with its massive increase in value, the Mona Lisa has also been given much more stringent security measures. And I don't think that doing some sort of night at the museum-style sleepover and costume would kind of get you the same results in 2026. Regardless, this simple heist was likely successful because of its simplicity, and in my opinion, undoubtedly had a massive impact on history, at least in the realm of art heists. But with that being said, let's move on to a classic bank heist, the Northern Bank Heist. It is December 19th, 2004. Chris Ward is spending time with his family in his house in Northern Ireland. Chris Ward works for the Northern Bank, and being in the middle of the holiday season has made his work extremely stressful, making any time he's able to spend with his family that much more precious. Although this night was unlike any other night he's ever had with his family, because during the time simply watching soccer or I guess football, Chris receives a knock on the door. However, it wasn't Christmas carolers looking to sing for him and his family. It was a man saying he wanted to discuss football. However, after letting this man in, and then 2 mysterious men following this man into his home, the true intentions of these strangers were almost instantly revealed. The strangers, now intruders in Chris's home, instantly draw weapons, point them directly at his family, and tell Chris that they know he works at the Northern Bank, and they're going to use his access to rob the bank. And if he doesn't want to help cooperate, his entire family is going to die. Terrified and not wanting to end the lives of everybody he loves, Chris follows the orders of these men, and they tell him that he needs to collect his work clothes immediately and get into the car waiting outside. The men inform Chris that they are going to stay behind and watch his family, and they reassure him that as long as he follows every single one of their commands, his family will remain alive. However, if he disobeys the gunmen, his family will pay the price. Not left with many options, Chris collects his work uniform and enters the vehicle outside, where the driver points another gun at Chris and takes him to a secluded location. While Chris Ward is being held hostage in a vehicle en route to who knows where, his supervisor at the Northern Bank, Kevin McCullen, has experienced a similar situation. 2 men knocked on Kevin's door pretending to be police officers. They ask him to quickly step outside regarding a family situation, and as soon as Kevin steps outside, he is met with a gun in the face, and both him and his wife are quickly apprehended. Kevin's wife is blindfolded and taken away by one of the men, and Kevin is told that she is going to be taken to a safe location, and in 24 hours, if he does everything they say, he will return her to him completely unharmed. At that point, Kevin's wife is taken away. Kevin is restrained in a spare room, and Chris just so happens to arrive at this secluded location, also known as Kevin's house, although in a separate room. Eventually, both Kevin and Chris were brought into the living room of Kevin's apartment, and the mastermind behind this plot made his plan very clear. The main captor of Kevin and Chris tells them both that they are going to conduct a robbery of their work, and they are going to do so flawlessly if they want to see their family or loved ones alive. The captor gives the men vague details of how the plan is going to go down, but primarily uses this time to enforce authority and respect rather than spilling the beans too early. The captor then gives both of these men flip phones that only contain 1 number in the contact book. The contact, of course, being a burner phone owned by the captor. And for the rest of that night, Kevin and Chris sat helplessly in Kevin's apartment, waiting for the following day, when they would be forced to not only betray their employer, but to embark on the largest bank heist in UK history. Following a long night of interrogation and intimidation, the sun finally rises, and the two men are instructed to get ready for work as normal. And as 11 a.m. rolls around, the two men are sent out of the house, being reminded of the stakes and told to act as if nothing was happening. Both Kevin and Chris arrive at work at 11:30 and 12 o'clock. And as instructed, they go about their day as if nothing was happening. You see, Kevin and Chris weren't targeted randomly. One of the two were actually key holders, and they both had direct access to cash, as it directly correlated to their jobs, meaning that they were perfect targets for this heist. From 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., nothing out of the normal happened, besides the fact that both Kevin and Chris had to use the phones they were provided to call the captors 3 times throughout the day, and to ensure that the captors had an opportunity to once again remind them both of the stakes. At exactly 5 p.m., the time when the bank closes, Kevin and Chris both make up an excuse of why they need to stay after hours. An excuse they come to is that they need to recount the cash as today was so busy, and they didn't have the proper time to accurately count everything in the vault. This was a valid excuse that didn't raise any eyebrows. And as every other employee of the bank left, Chris and Kevin were the only 2 people in the bank besides 2 security guards. As instructed, Kevin and Chris both make their way down to the vault and use their credentials to enter it without triggering any alarms. The bank vault in the Northern Bank actually requires 2 separate employees to have access cards to open the vault. And the 2 employees that hold these access cards are swapped weekly, meaning that whoever put this heist together knew exactly who to target at the exact right time. But we'll discuss that more later. As the 2 men entered the vault, they began the next phase of the operation. They began to fill a duffel bag full of big bills, 50 and 100 pound sterling notes. And in a roughly 15-minute time period, they were able to put over £1 million into one duffel bag. As instructed, once the money is in the bag, Chris calls the captors once again to be informed on where he needs to go. And the captor tells him that he needs to take this duffel bag to a bus stop directly outside of the bank. Chris follows those instructions. And as he arrives at the meetup location, a car arrives, takes the duffel bag, and to Chris and Kevin, their nightmare is finally over. The job is done. They gave them what they wanted, and nobody knows. That was until Chris started walking back towards the bank and received another phone call. Obviously, it was the captors, and they told him that the mission wasn't quite done yet. The first $1 million they got out of the bank was the first of many, and was more of a loyalty test than a heist. And now the true mission begins. Chris was informed that he and Kevin had to go back into the vault and basically fill every metal box they could find with cash and bring those metal boxes to the back door where delivery trucks will arrive and take them away. Now obviously this is much easier said than done, and the way that they're able to do this successfully is quite unique. After Kevin and Chris arrive back into the vault, they fill as many metal boxes as they can with cash. These metal boxes individually can fit anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, and they get to work filling 12 different metal boxes on 2 separate carts. But the work isn't done yet, because now they need to take these 2 carts to the loading bay, which is the only place that cash can go in and out of the bank in bulk, which requires passing security guards and also going to a road that is only accessible to licensed vehicles. How Chris and Kevin end up doing this successfully is they put the money in boxes that are usually intended for waste paper, not actual cash. And Kevin and Chris are both able to use their seniority at the bank in relationship with the security guards to convince them to allow an unauthorized vehicle for a delivery, claiming there was too much waste paper due to the holiday and they needed a third-party service to take the waste paper away, and that it was okay. And while the security guards agreed to allow an unauthorized vehicle into the loading bay, they insisted they stand watch just in case. And just like that, Chris, Kevin, and a security guard stand at the loading bay, and a random unmarked truck arrives. 2 men step out of the truck, and all 5 of them load all of the waste paper into this van. And while at this point it would seem like, of course, the nightmare is now finally over, it wasn't quite yet, because one of the men driving this truck handed Kevin a roll of garbage bags and then left in the truck. Kevin and Chris knew what these garbage bags were meant for, and they quickly returned back to the vault and put all of the money that was left over that wasn't in the initial duffel bag or in the metal tins into these garbage bags. And surprisingly, Kevin and Chris were able to fit over £5 million into garbage bags. However, the hard part was moving these garbage bags past security. They already got rid of the waste paper. So what could this possibly be? And while the mission seemed impossible, Kevin and Chris had no other option, as the two men walked past the security guard, wheeling multiple carts full of overfilled garbage bags. Shockingly, the security guards did not bat an eye, likely because it was assumed these men were doing simple cleanup after hours. And it does make sense considering these men had allegedly just gotten rid of a ton of waste paper. So potentially there was other waste paper or waste products that needed to be taken care of. Kevin and Chris once again make it to the loading bay, and they once again accompanied by a security guard. And they all waited together for 45 minutes for the van to come back and pick up all of the garbage bags. During those 45 minutes, if the security guard even questioned what was in the bags at any point, the entire operation could have been blown up. However, that simply never happened. And after these garbage bags were loaded into the truck, the unassuming-looking robbers informed Kevin and Chris that their job was finally done and that they could finally go home. However, at this point, even though the heist was complete, the hell for these men was not. After safely making his way home, Kevin McCullen immediately called authorities and reported that he was used in the crime to rob over 30 million pounds from the bank that he worked at, and almost instantly, an investigation was underway. However, he would likely come to regret this call, as during the investigation of the biggest heist in UK history, police actually ended up putting Kevin in jail for over a year, while he awaited trial because they assumed he had to be involved because of how perfect this heist was. However, after that year investigation, they had to admit that they had nothing, and Kevin was set free. After now becoming a hostage of both criminals and the law following them letting Kevin go, they quickly turned their sights to Chris. Although after a multi-year investigation into Chris, they also found that he was too innocent and not an insider. And while this entire situation took place over 22 years ago now, in 2004, as of today, nobody has been arrested for the actual heist or robbery of the Northern Bank. And the roughly 30 million pounds that was stolen was never recovered. Now, in the year following the robbery, there were 22 investigations that took place and 13 arrests. However, every single one of these arrests that took place only resulted in money laundering charges at best. And there was never a connection made to the people who actually perpetrated the heist itself. Only accessories, if you will, possibly making the Northern Bank heist one of the biggest successful independent bank heist in human history. But we're still not done. Really quickly, I just wanted to say, believe it or not, this is the first video I've ever made about heists, and there is so many to talk about. If you guys want it, there is a heist-based video I want to make that revolves around weird heists. Like, for example, there's somebody who stole an entire transport truck full of Nutella, and that was never found, but I didn't know if that's too weird or if you guys would want to see it. But regardless, if you guys want more heist videos, leave a like or leave a comment below. Oh, and by the way, according to YouTube, only roughly 30% of you guys watching this video right now are actually subscribed. So, if you like my videos and want to see a brand new one every single Friday, hit that subscribe button and become a bro today. Now, with all of the shameless self-promo out of the way, let's get to the next and final heist on this list, the Kim Kardashian heist. It was Paris Fashion Week in 2016, and anybody was in Paris. Kim Kardashian had just touched down, and she was making her way to her hotel. Where she was staying was known as one of the, if not the most luxurious hotels in all of France. It was known as the Hotel des Hortels. And the room that Kim had booked cost over $16,000 per night, though not for no reason. Not only was this hotel luxurious, but it was known for its security and anonymity for celebrities. Access to this building was hidden behind gates. It had no marked address, and there was no formal lobby, only a simple courtyard with a concierge. At face value, this seems like one of the best places to be. However, for Kim Kardashian, this hotel ended up being the place she would have one of the most terrifying experiences of her entire life. After making it to the hotel and arriving to her room, Kim was quick to post to social media, making it known that she was at Paris Fashion Week and that she was at one of the best hotels money could buy. However, this simple social media update wasn't as harmless as it seemed, as criminals in Paris were already plotting on robbing one of the celebrities to roll through their town. All they needed to do was pick one, and due to Kim Kardashian's massive online presence and habit at the time of posting live updates, she became the prime target for some of the most notorious jewelry thieves in all of France. Late into the night on October 2nd, 2016, after following almost every one of her updates online for days, 5 men decided to make a move. After gathering supplies and strategically planning, They disguised themselves as police officers and made their way to the exclusive hotel. Not only were these men disguised, but they were also armed. And using these disguises and weapons, they were able to quickly not only make their way into the courtyard, but into the hotel, threatening staff members at gunpoints and forcing them to lead them directly to Kim Kardashian's room. At this point, the men began to split up. One of the robbers stood on the street entrance of the hotel to ensure that nobody was entering. Following that, two of the men stayed in the courtyard to ensure that nobody from inside the hotel was trying to leave. And then the last two men took the concierge at gunpoint directly to Kim Kardashian's room. After the concierge brought the two men to Kim Kardashian's room, Kim Kardashian's personal assistant came in to greet them. They forced the concierge to open the door, and both men entered the room, weapons drawn, pointing directly at Kim Kardashian. They yelled at her in French, told her to get onto the floor, and they bound her hands with zip ties, taped her feet together and taped her mouth closed, and then also bound the concierge and hid them both in a bathroom. One of the robbers stood in the bathroom, keeping them both at gunpoint, while the other man quickly dug through all of Kim's luggage and began collecting her jewelry. While Kim was in the bathroom, held at gunpoint, she let out a scream that woke up one of her friends that was also in the same suite. The suite was a multi-floor suite, meaning that her friend was essentially a floor below her. But when she was awoken to a scream, she knew something was wrong. So she locked herself in a separate bathroom and called Kim's bodyguard, who at the time was at the club with Kim's sisters. But unfortunately, this call was useless because by the time that the bodyguard would arrive at the hotel, every single one of the robbers would be gone. And almost hilariously, they escaped on bike. That's right. The men who had just broken into a hotel and robbed Kim Kardashian at gunpoint, stealing a total of over $10 million worth of jewelry, left the scene of the crime on bikes. But that's not even the craziest part of the story. I'm going to reveal that in just a second. After the bodyguard arrived in the hotel, he cleared all of the rooms, found Kim, and unbound her and the concierge. And then they quickly notified the authorities. When the police arrived, unfortunately, they weren't able to do much as, at a first glance, there was absolutely no evidence. No fingerprints, no bullet casings, no tire marks. This heist was committed by professionals, although it wasn't the perfect crime. For weeks following the heist, Kim was left traumatized, $10 million poor, and police had almost no leads, making the situation look rather bleak. That was until investigators were able to find a small trace of DNA that were left on the plastic bindings used on Kim Kardashian's wrist. However, there was no exact match at that time, but that didn't mean they could get one. Over the next 3 months, police began building cases against every known criminal that could have possibly been involved. And then all in one morning, police engaged in 17 raids at once of all potential suspects, storming their homes and gathering them for questioning. And interestingly, even though not all of those 17 individuals were involved, all 5 of the actual robbers were a part of those 17, meaning that the police did have their suspects. They just didn't know it yet. And from then on, it would take multiple years of a slow, grueling court proceeding for the truth to be revealed and justice to finally be served. Although the results may not be what you think, it wouldn't be until April of 2025 that the trials for the suspects would finally take place. Just for context, that's 9 years after the robbery took place. Regardless, 10 individuals were on trial, the 5 men who conducted the robbery and 5 additional accessories. Now, interestingly, it was on this trial that it became publicly known that almost everybody involved in this heist was elderly. For example, the 2 men that held Kim Kardashian at gunpoint during the robbery were both 60 years old at the time of the robbery, meaning that during the time of the trial, they were nearly 70 years old. And some of the other robbers involved were well into their 70s, which is why at the time the media was calling these robbers the Grandpa Gang or the Grandpa Robbers. And rightfully so. Regardless, the result of the trials came in May of 2025, and it was concluded that 8 of the 10 individuals on trial were found guilty. And out of those 8, one of the individuals who was considered the ringleader was given 8 years in prison, and the other 7 were given 3 to 8 years. However, none of them actually will serve prison time, and that's for 2 reasons. Firstly, because a lot of these suspects already served time in pretrial detention. And secondly, because most of the robbers were in their 60s or 70s, with the oldest robber being 79. The court openly incited to not impose harsher sentences to ensure they stayed out of jail simply because of their age. And whether or not that's right, I'll let you be the judge. But to me, it's kind of ridiculous how you can not only rob somebody at gunpoint, but do so and take over $10 million of personal valuables only to be caught in a 9-year long legal proceeding, then just to be served basically a slap on the wrist because you're old. A tiny morbid bit of me thinks it's kind of hilarious to imagine 5 old people robbing Kim Kardashian at gunpoint only to escape on bikes with over $10 million worth of loot. But it's also important to recognize that while some of you may claim that $10 million is nothing to her, in reality, monetary value aside, those items had sentimental value. And besides that, this situation is traumatizing. Kim reportedly stated that she believed she was going to lose her life in this event, which isn't unreasonable at all. And regardless of fame or status, Kim is somebody's daughter, somebody's mom, somebody's ex-wife, and somebody's favorite movie star. And that's why I always like to emphasize whenever I discuss crimes that there are real victims in these situations, and we should try to be empathetic and sympathetic to our fellow humans. But regardless, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end this video here. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want more videos about crazy or weird heists, leave a like or leave a comment below saying part 2. And hey, if you're new here and you made it all the way to the end of this video, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now and join the SavantPOV family. We drop a brand new video every single Friday, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming next. But in case you just need a little more bro before you go to bed, check out the video on screen right now. It's a video that, according to YouTube, you are going to love, and I highly recommend checking it out. Thank you bros so much for watching this video, and as always, trust me bro,